Hey folks, welcome back, and today we're actually not doing Dominions for once. We are talking about the II patch for Total War Warhammer 2. Some of you watch the videos I do on Total War Warhammer 2. It's not the most popular thing I do on my channel, but I really love this game, so I'm going to keep doing it, never fear. And with the new patch coming out and the Vampire Coast arriving, the game is promising to get a lot more interesting. The Vampire Coast, in case you haven't seen all the stuff about them and all the early access stuff that larger YouTubers are doing right now, and etc., is a ranged heavy undead faction focused on gunpowder units. So lots of range, lots of armor piercing, lots of artillery. They've got some cool monsters. They've got cool legendary lords like Luther Harkon up here. They've got Queen Bess, the largest cannon in the game, which is kind of like it's like a somewhat beefier hell cannon, and it's priced like that too. So they've got a lot of cool stuff going for them. Zombie mobs with rifles, deck gunners, which are fantastic to me, mainly because they promise to be the prototype of Skaven Warblock Jezzails when those come out, which should be sometime soon. Cross your fingers, knock on wood. Hopefully early next year. They look like they're going to be tons of fun. Plus, they have some classic old Vampire Counts units, as well as, of course, giant monsters like the Necrofex Colossus. They have giant crabs. They've got an ethereal opera singer lady. They're pretty rad. Today, however, we're not going to talk about them so much. They've been talked about a lot. We're going to talk about the patch, the II patch that's coming out. Where is it? The II patch. Yeah, there it is. Yuck it up. Give it a second. Laugh at the joke. All right, moving on. Specifically, we're going to talk about, well, the factions that I like, because that's what I like to do. Skaven, Greenskins, and Tomb Kings. There's been a lot of changes. Legendary Lord changes for the campaign, which is pretty good. The only Skaven change is that Tretch has had his bonuses that he gives people during ambushes and after retreating moved to be linked specifically to him rather than everyone in his faction. Skarsnik now gives plus 14 charge bonus to Night Goblin Squighoppers, which is sort of hilarious. Night Goblin Squighoppers are already incredibly effective at charging into infantry. With a plus 14 charge bonus, dwarves will hate him. I mean, more than they already do. Dwarves already hate Skarsnik to death, but the Night Goblin Squighoppers suddenly ramming into them with, like, I don't know, 60-some charge bonus or whatever it is. That'll be pretty hilarious. Norska got some changes, which is pretty cool. Basically, they're just buffing the old world lords to keep up with the new world lords that they came out of Total War Warhammer 2. Because the old lord, I mean, there has been power creep. Like, that is undeniable. The new world factions are significantly more powerful in a lot of ways, and this is kind of setting things straight just a little bit, improving balance slightly. Even Nguyen Liang Ke, who already had a ton of utility, has gotten buffed here. Balthazar Gelt has gotten buffed in campaign. Who else? Grimgor. Grimgor's campaign has gotten buffed, which is great. Not hugely substantially. He gets more money from winning battles, which is good. More movement. Slightly lower upkeep on Black Orcs. It's not a big change. This is the biggest change. An extra plus 6 leadership on Black Orcs and then plus 5 armor. That's really the only one that matters out of this list. This is relatively unimportant. They already have a ton of armor. This is a meaningless change, but this is valuable, actually. So this is all the campaign stuff. Campaign is nice, but what I want to look at is the actual in-battle changes. So general battle changes, first of all. They've added the new faction for, I've forgotten his name. It's not Helman Gorst, it's the other one. The other vampire. I can find him here. Vampire Counts. Come here, Vampire Counts. Where'd you go? What's your name? I've never played as you. I don't know who you are. Heinrich Kemmler, that's it. Kemmler. So Kemmler is now starting over in Bretonnia in the campaign, which is kind of interesting. These are all campaign changes right here. Let's go back down to the battle changes. They've at least partially fixed the artillery bug in sieges, which is pretty cool. They've fixed how the AI uses Ushabti, summons, and menace from below. These are really cool. They've added the Encourage attribute to the Goblin Great Shaman and the Night Goblin Shaman, which were the only Greenskins heroes who didn't have them. So, that's good. The Goblin Great Shaman on a wolf having Encourage, that's actually pretty cool. Maybe you can actually use him now as a cheap budget lord. Sometimes I worry about CA. Siege Attacker aspects, etc. High Elf Noble will no longer incorrectly do damage on collision. So that is a nerf to a specific, mainly a chariot unit, although it could also affect him on the horse, I guess. I mean, chariots have collision damage, but I was wondering earlier if High Elf Nobles were bugged in some way because they seem to do a lot more damage than, say, Ethiomar Chariots. Single-entity Chariots in general are very powerful. High Elf Nobles on Chariots specifically, I played a couple battles with them and they seemed like they might be a little bit broken. So that's a good fix. They fixed the Fireball bug as well. In case you didn't know what this was, if you cast Fireball at exactly the right time when you were already in the process of casting it, or immediately after casting it, it would reset the cooldown and fire it again instantly, costing no winds of magic. You could use this to spam Fireballs, I think, infinitely. At least for a long, long time, until you messed up your clicking. So it's good that they fixed that as well. Some visual changes. Alethanar will now use a giant eagle in his Moonbow quest. Okay, that's interesting. That's a good fix. Rage is no longer removed when disabling Foeseeker or Fight or Die from Marauder Chieftain Lord. Nobody ever uses Marauder Chieftains, but still, you can't have this kind of bug. Rage is a very powerful ability, actually. Well, it's sort of powerful. It's powerful if he gets stuck into a blob where he's going to be fighting for a long time. If he gets gooned out, it really doesn't matter. And lots of graphics issues. Great. Audio changes. Let's look at the balancing. This is the important thing. The Beastmen are happy with this patch. They've given Malagor a whole bunch more stats. They did increase his cost a little bit, but I think it's still probably worth it since he's a Footlord. They increased the Gorbel's mass, hit reaction, ignore chance, knock, interrupt, ignore chance, and no longer has terrain penalties in shallow water. So basically, they haven't changed the Gorbel's actual combat stats, but they've made him a lot more likely to actually get to use them, which is important because the main complaint about the Gorbel in Total War Warhammer 2 has been that he gets punted too easily, and so doesn't get to use those good stats he has. They've decreased the cost of all Minotaurs, which is great because those guys were overpriced. I think they're still probably a little bit overpriced, but they were really overpriced. They've decreased the cost of Feral Manticores, which is good because they are terrible, and they buffed Giants slightly, and Razor Gore Herds. So, minor changes, but good changes. Up here, they've increased the cost of the Rune Lord for Dwarves and decreased the costs of the Legendary Lords. That's good because the Rune Lord is the only choice you ever see in multiplayer. I don't think I've played, in the last 6 or 7 matches I've played against Dwarves, I don't think I haven't seen a Rune Lord ever. I think I've always seen Rune Lords. They've nerfed Bugman's Rangers slightly, buffed Hammerers, Peak Gate Guard, Gyro Bomber, Skyhammers, and Coral Great Weapons. Okay, so that's fine. They're all very minor changes, but definitely wanted. Greenskins. This is really interesting to me. They've given Skarsnik a lot more mass, so he's harder to punt. Fine. They've given Grimgor a ton more mass. And then plus 5 armor, which is a very, very small buff. And plus 7 melee defense, which is actually a fairly significant buff. That increases his melee defense by like 20%, a little bit more. That's pretty solid. The 600 mass is the most important part here, though, because the main problem with Grimgor is that he gets cycle charged, and he can't do any damage to cavalry who rush in, or monsters, who just rush in, knock him over, rush out before he finishes his standing up animation, and so he never gets to attack them. With this much extra mass, in the right situation, he might now be able to stay on his feet and deal some damage back. I can't guarantee he always will, and it still probably does not make him competitive, but at least it's something. To be honest, if you wanted to make Grimgor competitive in multiplayer, I feel like you would have to give him an aura, and a pretty powerful one, because Grimgor is already really good in combat. Like, if he gets into melee combat, single combat with somebody, he will usually kill them. There aren't all that many lords in the game who can fight Grimgor. There certainly aren't all that many infantry units in the game who can fight Grimgor. The problem is just that he doesn't get there. He either gets sniped out before he approaches, or he gets into melee, gets cycle charged to death by a flying goon squad, and never accomplishes anything. Because the targets that he actually wants to fight, infantry and foot lords and even cavalry lords to an extent, he can't reach. That being so, especially since a lot of the other lords are getting very serious buffs, like really significant buffs, I think Grimgor needs something to make his targets want to fight him. Like a powerful aura that you have to kill him to remove or something like that. I don't know. I'm not sure. It's hard to balance slow foot lords. And Grimgor is the epitome of a slow footlord, so, we'll see. Cheaper Night Goblin Archers, okay, I still probably won't use them. Cheaper Night Goblin Archer Fanatics, that's fine. This one is interesting. Plus 10 health per entity on Squig Herds. That's going to be a total of plus 450 health on Large, which is a significant chunk. Might help them out a lot, because the main problem with Squig Herds currently, they're cheap, and they do pretty significant damage when they charge, but they rampage almost instantly. And once they're rampaged, of course, you can't pull them out, and then their stats really let them down, because their base stats are low. With the charge bonus and the bonus versus infantry, when they rock up and charge an infantry unit, they do good damage, but then they get stuck in combat, their stats, the charge bonus drains off, and they get slaughtered because they have low health and low armor. So this might really help them. Orc Boar Chariot plus 4 melee attack, that's interesting. Might be useful. Savage Orc Boar Boy Biggins have lost 2 charge bonus but gained a plus 5 bonus versus large. That's interesting. I'm not sure how much better it's going to make them. I'm not sure. Regular Boar Boy Biggins still have a bigger bonus versus large, but they naturally have a worse melee attack and lower damage. So Savage Boar Boy Biggins might be the ones to go for now. I'll have to test that out. And of course, Giants got the same small buff that all Giants got. In terms of one of the biggest changes in this patch is that Lizardmen Cold-Blooded got changed. Instead of being a heal with limited uses, it now stops rampage and gives plus 16 leadership. That is actually going to change the way that Lizardmen play a lot. On top of that, all the Lizardmen cavalry, Cold One Riders, Spear Riders, Horned Ones, Feral Cold Ones, they all now have rampage. Primal Instincts, or rampage, that is. They've all lost a bunch of their charge bonus and gained a lot of melee attack and a lot of damage, as well as a little bit of melee defense. So they've been changed from being shock cavalry, like most cavalry in this game are, to being melee cavalry who sit in combat and grind it out. And they have a lot of damage. So, like I said, this is going to change the way Lizardmen play. Because previously, Lizardmen, who have kind of been on the downslope for a while now, Lizardmen play has been centered around cycle charging monsters on top of their tough infantry and using cold blood and revivification crystals and healing spells, stacking a lot of healing to make a few core units unkillable. Without cold-blooded healing, that strategy has taken a pretty significant nerf, but a lot of units have gotten a lot better at the cost of having rampage. Now Cold-Blooded stops rampage and has a cooldown. So now what you want is you want a bunch of Lizardman heroes and lords with Cold-Blooded so that they can stop people from rampaging so you can take advantage of their high stats, which is an interesting change. In the Halloween Invitational Ever-Chosen tournament, we got to see Lizardmen used pretty well, and it was very interesting. It was a little bit different from how it had been usually. The Sword of Scar Veteran got cheaper, a lot of other things got buffed a little bit. A lot higher bonus versus infantry on most of the dinosaurs, and a little bit cheaper, so probably going to see more of those in the future. Other than that, very minor buffs. Vampire counts. The vampire counts are now getting their bloodline lords. Those are interesting, but they almost deserve a whole thing of themselves, so probably right after the patch comes out, I'll talk about them. Helman Gorse has gotten a bunch more health, that won't help him. Vampire Lord on the Nightmare, more armor, that's okay, and a lot of minor buffs and debuffs. Terrorgeist has been very minorly nerfed. Vargeist, Cairn Wraiths, Crypt Horrors, Devils of Swartzhafen have all been buffed, and the Mortis engine does less damage now. So they're moving towards more independently capable vampire counts units, sort of discouraging the blob around the Mortis engine strategy. Might work out, might be interesting. And the Strigoi Ghoul King on foot, who I have literally never seen, has got minus 100 cost. I don't think anybody's going to bring him still. I think if you're going to get a Ghoul King, you're going to get him on a Terrorgeist. Really don't see any other option there. Kolek has been nerfed. Archaon got a huge buff. Costs more, and he lost a lot of damage, but he got a lot of armor piercing damage. 145 more AP melee damage. That makes Archaon a murderer. A straight up powerhouse. That alone will make him an incredibly powerful duelist, because most of the lords who are actually going to be fighting have a lot of armor, and so having that armor piercing damage is super, super important for killing other lords. So Archaon on the horse is now going to be like a guided missile of murder for the Warriors of Chaos. That's a really good buff, especially because he has his items. I think some of his items are getting changed too. Sigvald, who cares about Sigvald? Dragon Ogres, Feral Manticores, Chaos Giants, Swords of Chaos, and Chaos Knights all slightly buffed. These, I think, are actually the most important, this AP melee damage. For Chaos Knights especially, giving them extra AP melee damage makes them a lot more competitive against other high-tier cavalry, because high-tier cavalry almost universally has very high armor. So having a little bit more armor piercing makes the Chaos Knights much, much more dangerous in those competitions against Dragon Princes, Grail Knights, whatever else might be thrown against them. I'm losing my mind once again. Demigryphs, all that kind of stuff. Demigryphs and Grail Knights, I think, still beat Chaos Knights, almost certainly, but they'll take a lot more damage doing it now. Wood Elves, small buffs, minus cost, plus cost on one of the RORs. Minus cost and minus ammo. Waystalker, hero, has gotten a bunch of melee buffs. The Tree Man, like Archaon, the Tree Man has swapped over to a lot more armor piercing, as has the Ancient Tree Man. So this seems to be a theme. Big monsters and lords are getting a lot more armor piercing, less base damage, much more focused on killing hard targets. And this is generally just a huge buff. I mean, it makes them a lot more powerful. It may not look like it, but just based on the numbers. But the way armor works in Total War Warhammer 2, having more AP at the cost of less base damage is really an improvement. For Norska, mammoths have been completely reworked. They're going kind of back to the way they were in Total War Warhammer 1, where they worked like giant chariots. Less mass, a lot worse stats, generally speaking, but more bonus versus infantry, and now they have collision damage. So now they can plow through units and inflict massive, massive damage on infantry, which will be very interesting to see. We got to see that also at the Everchosen Invitational, where a War Mammoth swept through 2 units of Death Guard from the side, and actually it might have been 2 mammoths. I think it was 2 mammoths, 1 unit of Death Guard each. In any case, they swept through them and obliterated them, like 75 or 80% damage on one pass. It was impressive. It was insane. It'll be interesting to see how that's going to be balanced. Mammoths have a ton of HP, and if they can do that to infantry, it might just not be viable to fight mammoths with infantry anymore. You might have to fight them with cavalry or monsters, which will be interesting. Female Great Weapons have been nerfed slightly. Skin Wolves have been buffed slightly. That's cool. Marauder Berserkers, slight nerf. Marauder Champions, slight buff. So, little tweaks. Frost Breath is no longer flaming damage. I'm glad to hear it. And Marauder Hunters with Axes have more projectile mass to do knockback more often. Great. Skaven. This is interesting to me. These are actually more major changes than most of the others, just because even though the cost changes are very small, these units already were very cheap. So minus 25% cost on all clan rats. So clan rats, basic clan rats, now cost the same as goblins. They're slightly worse still. Like, clan rats straight up lose a fight to goblins most of the time, but they're a little bit more affordable now. Like, if you're taking a front line of 4 or 5 clan rats, this means that you can now afford an extra unit of Skaven slaves, which doesn't sound like much, but is something. Deathglow Bombardiers and Poisonwind Globadiers are both a little bit cheaper and have more ammo. Personally, I never thought ammo was the problem with these guys. Keeping them alive has always been the problem, so the cheapness is great. The ammo, doesn't really matter. Warp Fire Throwers being cheaper, that's very cool. I would love to see more of these guys. I would like to get better at using them, actually, because they're really hard to use sometimes. Hellpit Abomination. Extra damage, and the Skaven Slave Spears summoned when they die now have the standard Skaven abilities. That part isn't important. The extra damage is kind of cool. I don't think it'll make a huge difference. I still think A-bombs aren't great, but there are matchups in which they have value. If the enemy is going to be taking large monsters, Hellpit Abominations are pretty decent nowadays at taking out large monsters. When they first came out, they were awful. They've been buffed since then. Rat Ogre Bonebreaker, a bunch of extra health, which is cool. Queek Headtaker plus 19 bonus versus infantry. That kind of throws me a little bit. I mean, he already had, like, I think it was plus 16, so I think he's up to plus 35 or so bonus versus infantry, which is, if I recall correctly, the highest bonus versus infantry in the game, or close. Like, he's got a bonus versus infantry comparative to chariots. And on top of that, of course, he has the trophy heads, so he can debuff enemy heroes and lords. What this means is that Queek Headtaker will now viciously, brutally curb stomp any foot lord that he gets near. but he's never really going to get near another Foot Lord if they don't want him to. I mean, he's a little bit faster than most infantry, and he does have the Verminous Valor, which lets him bust through infantry lines to get after fleeing enemies, but he's still not cavalry fast. And most lords, I mean, you don't see Foot Lords very often at all. And I just don't think Queek still has a place. And I don't think it's about his combat stats. Like Grimgor, Queek is a Foot Lord who is optimized for something that just doesn't really exist in the current meta. You're not going to have a Foot Lord who isn't like Skrull, who isn't an extremely dangerous caster that you don't want to get near anyway. So it'll be interesting to see if that does anything. This is also a cool little buff. Stormvermin Halberds got a little bit more melee attack, which will make them do a little bit more damage to cavalry trying to cycle charge them. That's very useful. Tomb King, Screaming Skull, cheaper. Casket of Souls, more accuracy. Honestly, I'm not entirely certain about that. Although I guess I've never used them, so yeah, sure, they're probably not that great. Scepter, more melee defense. Necrosphinx plus health. Sphinx of Usekf minus health. You saw the Sphinx of Usekf all the time. You also see Necrosphinxes all the time, so I'm not sure why they're getting more health, but okay, maybe the stats are they're underperforming slightly. And the Sepulchral Stalkers and the Eyes of the Desert both got a little bit buffed. That's neat. I would like to see these guys, because they are very cool. In terms of battle abilities, what's interesting here? The Summoned Stormvermin got the standard Skaven abilities. That was just an overlook. Skarsnik's Prodder has gotten more explosive damage, as has whatever the Venom Staff is. So that's nice. Common of Cassandora has gotten a lot more armor-piercing damage as well. That's cool. Flamestorm now drags entities towards it rather than pushing them away. That is going to make Flamestorm a lot more effective, because throwing targets out of its area of effect is one big reason why vortexes do less damage than you'd think. And the vortexes that don't do that do a lot more damage than you'd think. The Black Sun of Xerius does a lot more damage than most vortexes because it sucks things in towards the center, and now Flamestorm is doing the same thing. So that will make Flamestorm a lot more powerful. Might be enough to make it overshadow the Burning Skull as the go-to damage spell from the Lore of Fire. What else? Lance Formation has been nerfed. So we'll see how that affects Bretonnia. It might be bad for them. Ballistics Calibration gone down in duration, nobody really cares. Gorkle Fix-It has been buffed. Increased duration and minus 48% movement speed, but the Wa has been nerfed some. So the melee attack increase gone down to 20 from 26. I had a really embarrassing battle recently where I accidentally clicked the Wa button when I was trying to chase someone down with Azag and completely wasted it. I had nothing in combat for the entire duration. Not relevant, I just thought I'd mention it. I screw up a lot in this game. Destroyer only adds plus 15 ability recharge per 90 seconds. That's nice. Lots of little item tweaks. This is very, very interesting to me. All these. So Death Frenzy has increased its duration. Apparently the upgraded version now has a duration of 2, which I'm not sure is an increase, but we'll set that aside. But the increased duration to 28. Death Frenzy has always been a bad spell because its duration is so low. I think its duration was like 20, 18, something like that. It was very, very short. Death Frenzy gives melee attack and immune to psychology, or unbreakable. I don't even remember exactly what it does because I've never used it since my first couple of Skaven battles. If it has a duration of 28, it might actually be useful, especially because if I recall correctly, the upgraded is an AoE. So that might be very handy to help you win in the front line. Playing a Skaven winning in the front line is always kind of dicey, and it's always really interesting to do it because nobody expects it. Everybody goes, oh, Skaven, they have a whole bunch of trash infantry. My front line will win no problem. No. If you take the assassins with the Rivalhide talismans, if you cast spells in the front line, if you bring a Stormvermin or two, some Plague Monks, Skaven infantry can easily trash can other factions who aren't ready for it. Skitterleap and Night Shroud are the same kind of spell. They're the spells that give you stock. And the most interesting thing here, their power cost has been increased by a lot. But they now have a radius. That is huge, because it used to be these spells only hit one unit, and sending one unit on a solo stealth mission generally isn't all that useful, even if it is high duration. But with a radius, now you can pack a whole bunch of units in together, start them off somewhere the enemy can't see them, overcast Skitterleap or Night Shroud, and then send the whole gang off on a flanking maneuver. They get almost a minute and a half if you overcast of complete invisibility. It's the better stock version. It's not regular stock. It's the one where you have to be right up in somebody's grill before they see you. That could be a fascinating change. I'm gonna mess around with that because that could be really, really cool. Ed has gotten a cost decrease. Nobody cares. It's still a bad spell. Gaze of Malice has been changed to an uncommon ability, max 3 uses, more recharge time, and more cost. So Malekith won't be spamming that shit like he usually does late game anymore. Lots of minor spell changes, and Gaze of Nagash, Shem's Gaze, all of these magical missiles have been buffed. So higher accuracy, lower power cost, and changed to a higher ballistic trajectory. That, I think, is actually the most interesting thing here, because a big part of the reason why magic missiles are typically bad, if fired from the ground, is that the missiles actually dip low and hit the ground as they're flying. So changed to a higher ballistic trajectory. I hope this means something like the arrows of Kurnos, the one that kind of arcs, that the Wood Elves have, that like artillery arcs over in a very high ballistic trajectory and then drops down onto the target. If so, that could make these spells actually really useful. Vindictive Glare and Gaze of Mork I've experimented with at different times. They've never really impressed me, partially because they just don't hit very hard, and also because they miss a lot and they hit the ground a lot because they're cast from non-flying, low-to-the-ground characters. If Vindictive Glare actually reliably hits its target and doesn't impact the ground on the way, then taking it on Night Goblin Shamans could be a really good pick, because it's really cheap and you can use it to trigger the lore attribute, and you could fire it into blobs to help your infantry, or you could hunt cavalry with it. Hunting large with a magic missile spell could be really, really useful for greenskins, because the greenskin anti-large options are pretty lackluster at this point. I mean, they've got Biggins and they've got Boarboy Biggins, and Boarboy Biggins are mediocre and regular Biggins are fairly garbage. So, interesting stuff. Of course, I haven't gone through everything here. It would take me another hour or half hour to go through everything, so I'm not going to. But this is where the patch notes are. I very much encourage you to check them out. Very cool stuff. And I am really looking forward to it coming out on the 8th. Unfortunately, I do have to work on the 8th, so I can't, I probably won't have new Vampire Coast stuff up on the 8th unless it's quite late at night. I may do an extra video late at night just for it, because I'm hyped about this. But I will definitely start having some new patch stuff and new Vampire Coast stuff coming out on the 9th and afterwards, because I'm excited about the Vampire Coast. I'm excited about this patch. I'm excited about seeing how Skaven and Greenskins have changed. It'll be a good time. So, thanks for watching, listening to me ramble, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care.